everybody. No, your eyes do not deceive you, for I am driving a Lamborghini Gallardo. Very much like the one that I recently sold, although not exactly the same. This belongs to a very nice chap called Simon, who ran a thread about this car on Piston Heads. His username there is the same as his number plate on this car. It's 4321GO. He bought this car 8 years ago now, where it already had 43,000 miles and about 7 years behind it. At the time of purchase, it already had something of a thirst for oil, drinking some 2 litres every 1,000 miles, but the car did run relatively happily. This slowly continued getting worse until it got to about 96,000 miles, and he realised the problem was getting a little bit out of hand. So this was then shipped off to Ricky at RE Performance, who's just about the only person I would trust to rebuild one of these, and the car did have a full engine rebuild. He said the car was actually in a very unusual state, because although the cylinders had certainly been scored, it actually was still running perfectly well, and as long as you kept pouring more oil into it, it probably would have gone on for quite some time. But that's not really how you want to enjoy one of these, so the decision was made to rebuild it, and it was remade to very similar specifications to my own car. So it had the same CP Carrillo pistons, but unlike my car, this also got quite a bit of trick headwork from Ricky. So it now has sodium-filled Inconel valves and some old-school tuning, port polishing, and the like. This means it now puts out 520 horsepower over the original 500. So today I am able to answer the question, did I make a mistake in selling my car? Well, I've already been out in this briefly this morning to get some of the drive-bys, and I apologise if they're not to my usual standard, but you see, one of the other modifications made to this car is the fitment of a Superleggera exhaust. For the purposes of today's work, it doesn't really make a difference at all, but it is ruddy loud. With the Superleggera exhaust, when the valves open, it becomes more or less straight piped, and the valves open pretty early, so this car is obscenely loud. Therefore, for all the drive-bys, I asked Simon to go pretty gently. I will give it some beans in a little bit so you can hear it if it doesn't kill my microphone. I'm trying to stay on side with my neighbours here, and this car wasn't making life very easy, so yeah, apologies if the drive-bys aren't as dramatic as you might be hoping. I still think these are an amazing looking car, especially in this shade of blue Salem, and this car is all blue, unlike mine, which was part blue and part red. We never really solved the mystery behind that. It's also got a mixture of leather and Alcantara in here with some blue stitching, and it's a fairly nice thing. In typical Lamborghini fashion, it's a very odd driving position, especially compared to, say, a Ferrari or a McLaren. You feel like you've got the tiniest view out the front, you're sat way back, and the cabin is reasonably cramped. Even by McLaren standards, those are cramped, but don't feel it because they've got a lot of glass, and you sit quite far forward, and the scuttle is quite low. These, the exact opposite. I would say this doesn't feel quite as bad in terms of ride quality as my own car, but you can tell some of the bushes need attention because they are quite creaky. It's still not plush though, and I'll be interested to see how it performs when you really start to press on a little bit. The seats, unsurprisingly, are just as uncomfortable in my car, and this is something I definitely would have had to change. And that's a shame, because these look really nice, and they should be comfortable, they really should, but for some reason, they just aren't. I later found out when I drove a Huracan that the sports seats in that are also quite uncomfortable, so maybe I'm just not Lambo-shaped, whatever that is. Ferraris, no problem. McLaren's generally okay. Lotus, fine, but Lambos? Can't do it. In case anybody wants to make the inevitable weight comment, I did 900 miles in a week and a narrow-bodied Caterham 420 with the bucket seats, the carbon tillet seats in it. And that was actually very comfortable. Noisy, but quite comfy, so that's not the issue here. If anything, in a car like this, height is much more of a problem, and I don't have too much of that, about 5'10". Unlike my car, the AC in here works, which is nice, although the steering has that similar, sometimes got a little bit of feel to it, sometimes doesn't. It's a bit better than the early R8 V8 that I drove from Audi, but maybe not quite as good as some of the later ones. This car is a 55 plate, so it's still within what you'd consider the first generation of Gallardo. They later made some changes with the SE, which became part of the production run from 2006 to 2008, before they then changed the car quite dramatically and turned it into the LP, put in the 5.2 litre Audi engine and all that stuff. So in theory, under the skin, this is the same as my car, same gearing, all that. This car's also had a gearbox rebuild, and that seems to be something that these cars do tend to need. However, if you told me it had nearly 112,000 miles on the clock, I wouldn't really believe you, because it does not feel that way at all. There's a couple of giveaways, but they hint more at the car's age than anything. This leather here has gone a little bit funky, the same as it did on my car. There's 1 or 2 spots of corrosion on the body, and that's about it. Simon has kept this car in really, really good condition, and it's pretty much his daily driver. He takes the approach of, if you're going to own something as special as this, why wouldn't you drive it at every given opportunity? As you can imagine, I agree with that sentiment entirely. All right, let's give you a little bit of that antisocial racket, shall we? Brilliant engines. The response is absolutely sensational. They don't feel like they've got the most punch. A 1600 kilo real world curb weight probably masks it just a little bit, but it's very linear power, and as you probably tell, ruddy noisy in here. But it goes all the way to that 8,000 RPM red line quite happily, and it's really got legs, this thing. In fact, that's one of the problems with the early Gallardos. They are geared quite long, to a fault, I would say. I see the Simon's also fitted an aftermarket Pioneer head unit down here, which really is the only sensible thing to do. I also just love the general old school feeling in these cars. Okay, you can tell very clearly they've just pinched a load of Audi switchgear for this, but I don't actually mind that so much, because it's a very, very old school supercar thing to do. I'm pretty confident now that my car was definitely not riding right. This is still firm, this is still a bit jittery, but definitely more composed than my car. And we replaced some of the bushings in my car with some uprated items from a company in Eastern Europe, and they were more like race grade parts. They didn't really have any give in them, and that probably didn't help. Also a very good possibility that my dampers might have needed rebuilding, springs could have been past their best. There's a whole host of stuff that could have been wrong with that car, and probably was. Now, I've had a few people ask me as to why I sold the car because it needed work, when I bought it knowing that it needed work. Well, it's just really quite simple. As I mentioned, I think, in the video where I sold it, I wanted to be able to enjoy the car through the summer, and I clearly wasn't going to be able to, because it wasn't really enjoyable or drivable in the state I got it, and it was going to take another 3 or 4 months to fix those issues, if it was actually going to fix them. I think it probably would have sorted the issues, but then others would have remained, like the fact that these cars have next to no storage capacity in them. This is something I encountered again with the Huracan, and it's just a frustration, because actually, when sorted, this is a kind of car that you feel like you could probably do some proper miles in. Yet you don't have the space to take anything with you, and that limits your ability to go touring. I took the 430 up to Scotland, and the amount of stuff that can carry is frankly staggering. The boot is enormous, and that's not what you'd expect from a hardcore mid-engine Ferrari road car. Really quite liked it. I've been driving this car now for 12 minutes. I'm already starting to feel my sort of mid-lower back complaining a little bit. Such is the nature of these seats. They're just They're just not nice, unfortunately, but that's the way they are. The brakes respond really well. Gearbox, absolutely beautiful. Clutch does take some getting used to, but it's actually not so bad. The odd thing is the clutch pedal in here has sort of this much travel, and the throttle has sort of this much travel because of where it sits. You've got the wheel well over there, and these cars are really quite compact. You don't realise how tiny they are until you see them parked next to, well, just about anything else really. They're microscopic. The early 5-litre Gallardos have a real reputation for unreliability, particularly with regards to their engines. However, the truth is the engine itself is actually fairly solid and quite well built. What killed this, and has killed many before it, is the catalytic converters. Because of what this car is and the way Lamborghini set them up, the catalytic converters take a real beating all the time. You've got fire moving through that exhaust system, and that's just not good on the Cats. They're also what I suppose you might call an early catalytic converter. The science apparently has improved quite a bit since this car came out. 2003, remember, nearly 20 years ago. And they just weren't going to last. Probably didn't help when people tried to do silly things with these, like sit in town and revving the hell out of them. That's just not good on any car. Because of the way the timing is on these cars, what you get is the Cat is slowly breaking apart, and then on the overrun, the engine has the ability to essentially suck back in all those broken up pieces of Cat. Imagine you're pouring sand into your engine. That is ultimately exactly what was happening. Unsurprisingly, they don't really last long when that starts happening. So what you actually want is a car that's been decatted as early on as possible, or had some replacement sports cats put in. The problem with decatting or putting something free flowing in, as this car has experienced, is that that then makes it extraordinarily loud. So here's the real big test, because we're now about to go on the road that my car did not like at all. My favourite twisty turny country lane. I found my car to be very, very unsettled, very uncomposed, and at some points downright dangerous to drive enthusiastically. Is this car any different? It's better, for sure. Dramatically, not really. Very, very awkward child, the Gallardo. It's certainly capable of covering ground at a reasonable pace, but that really long gearing and fairly gentle amount of torque low down means that you don't think you're going as fast as you really are, so you pile into a corner with a bit too much speed. The steering then doesn't really want to talk to you at all, and you find yourself fighting with the car quite a bit, wrestling it around, and it will sort of do it, but you can sense that it's sort of just dragging the car around. In the Superleggera that I drove, I think I experienced a similar thing, and I thought it was sort of quite fun, really. But in the regular car, no. Having had more time behind the wheel, I just find this kind of behaviour out of a car tiring, if I'm honest. It's just not involving. You're wrestling with the thing, and I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who really like that, but I'd rather work with my car, not against it, and that's what it feels like in the Lamborghini all the time. There's plenty of cars I've driven with a reasonably firm setup, but all the truly great sports cars do find that point at where they start to just work with the road. This never comes in the Gallardo. On billiard table smooth roads, probably work a lot better, but there's a general shortage of those in the UK at the moment, and if I kept driving a car like this around here, there'd probably be a global shortage of earplugs as well. It would appear that in the War of the Italians, I am much more a Ferrari man. Doesn't stop me wanting a Lamborghini, of course, that's their charm. But it does seem to validate my decision to get rid of my car, because I think as much as I poured into it, at the end of the day, it just wasn't the right car for me. I would be lying if I said owning the Lamborghini was a regret. Generally speaking, in life, I tend to only regret the things that I didn't do. And I did own a Lamborghini. I did, for a very brief moment, have a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, and a Maserati on the driveway. And I hope one day I will again own a Lamborghini. But at the moment, chances are that'll be a Diablo. And a Diablo is quite some way off for me, I'm afraid. Unless you all want to go and watch another few more million of my videos, in which case I, of course, would be extremely grateful. But going to take a fair bit more hard work to get that, I think, and that's okay, because it's definitely a car worth waiting for. So, that then there is a short little video from me featuring a very raucous Lamborghini Gallardo. Thank you all for watching and tuning in. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.